Welcome to the Samurai Podcast. I am your host, John Barker. I am pleased and excited to be joined by the Tesla-owning Dan Persico. In his youth, Dan was a cadet in the Civil Air Patrol, and the only reason I bring that up is because anybody that does anything related to aviation, I bring that up just because I'm enthusiastic about it. Dan served 15 years in the United States Air Force, working a variety of duties, including tactical aircraft maintenance, command and control actions that supported homeland security, military police, security forces, and advanced program management. And those tasks included production of classified and unclassified systems, designing continuity plans, and oversight of information assurance officers. Dan was most recent CIO/CISO for the Virginia Department of Elections. He was responsible for overseeing business operations, technology support, software development, project management, cybersecurity, data privacy, and all the governance that are unique in the realm of elections oversight, which now has been designated as national critical infrastructure. He used his knowledge of elections policy and procedures to drive initiatives within the organization. He planned and organized and controlled all of the activities to ensure effective, efficient, and secure operations of each of their product lines within the portfolio of everything that he was in oversight, which was, as CIO CISO, everything. Dan, appreciate you taking the time to be here, man.
Thank you, John. Appreciate you having me.
Just going to have a fun and hopefully not make you cry conversation as we discussed before I hit the record button.
So don't make fun of me, okay? I'm sensitive, right?
Yeah, those Air Force guys.
Yeah.
Exactly. I'm used to talking to Marines.
That's what my dad used to tell me. Was a former Marine. I have to say former Marine. Can't say ex-Marine.
No, there's no. My dad and granddad. Mm-hmm. So give us a little bit. One of the things I really wanted to talk to you about was the role within election security, particularly with all of this junk that's been in the news for the last couple of years. But before you get to that point, how did your career in the Air Force and your experience lead you into that particular role with the state of Virginia?
Great question. And I'm like, how did that happen? I've been doing technology since I was 15, actually before then, but 15 employed. I worked for Best Buy back before it was the Geek Squad. I think I was a cashier, and then I was doing computer sales, and then I got into the computer repair business there and didn't do it very long, but I did get my A+. I think I was like 15 years old. And
oh, wow.
And so this was all while I was in high school, and I was doing some volunteer programs in high school where we refurbished computers for folks that didn't have the financial means to buy their own and things like that. And so it was a lot of just endpoint work, if you will, just fixing computers, replacing parts, and then, handing them out. I did similar at Best Buy, troubleshooting and home consumer grade computer stuff.
Sure.
Somehow I was doing my high school, doing some work with our website, and I needed to talk to what was, I guess, her role, the webmaster, I guess, at the time for Stafford County in Virginia. I reached out to her to see if she could do a link to our site or something like that. I think after a few conversations with her, I said, "Hey, do you got any jobs, any interns or whatever?" And she's like, "Actually." And then I ended up going and working there for a little while, which was pretty fun. I learned a lot there. Also, a brief stint working there after school for a few hours a day, and got a lot of experience in more of an enterprise environment in IT. Did everything from touch endpoints to servers to network. I remember helping deploy the first wireless access points back in the 802.1 or 802.11 A.
A was first.
Way back in the day, and deploying these wireless access points for the board of supervisors. And I think 1998 or 9 or something like that. And so I got a lot of experience. I was also doing a Cisco CCNA class while I was in high school, and then ended up using my experience that I got working at Stafford County to go get my CCNA. And so I had both an A+ and CCNA before I ever even graduated high school. And
that's unusual
at the time.
Probably at the time, extremely unusual.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I didn't really think much about it. Didn't really care all that much. I ended up joining the military because I wanted want to pay for college. Didn't have a college fund set up for me or rich parents that, so I knew I was on my own. I was like, well, this will give me experience and also pay for college. And they had no computer jobs. Everybody wanted to, do computers. So I said, whatever, I don't care. I'll just join whatever, but I want it to be something meaningful. And so I signed up to be an aircraft mechanic, and I was the aircraft mechanic on F-16s for my first 4 years or whatever. And I was hoping that I would somehow go to the computer side, but it really never happened. And then I ended up becoming a cop. But intertwined with all of this in those 14, 15 years in the military, I was always doing computer stuff. Even when I was an aircraft mechanic, everybody in the military has some sort of, at least in the Air Force, everyone in the Air Force has some additional duty that you do. You can be the fitness monitor, you can be the deployment manager. Well, I was the computer nerd for the group I was in. So the aircraft maintenance group that I was part of, I was like the liaison between the communications group and the maintenance group. And that also means I did basic endpoint support. We had like email migrations. I would get involved with those in addition to being an aircraft mechanic. So that kept me sharp.
So you were like a network engineer administrator of their environments?
I did have privileged access, but I wouldn't say I was more like if somebody put a help desk ticket in or needed a help desk ticket in, I was like first tier basically on site there. So I could fix like little things, whatnot. Again, when there's like bigger projects like migrations or equipment refreshes, I would obviously be a lot more involved with those things. And so I wasn't doing this. I'd say I spent maybe 5 to 10% of my time on a weekly basis doing that type of stuff. But what it did was it kept me sharp. It kept me still using terminology and lingo and seeing how. I remember we did an Exchange server migration one time, and what was new, learning what was new in the new Exchange environment from the previous areas I might have experience. And that helped me a lot, honestly, to keep sharp. And then when I became a cop, I was doing that a little bit still. But what ended up happening is that I started getting into cyber crimes and protection of classified information. And at one point, I got brought in as a cop because it was a compatible, what they call Air Force Specialty Code or AFSC. I had a compatible AFSC with the position that they could open up, but the primary purpose was not for me to be a cop, was really for me to do cybersecurity. And that was more I jumped into that. And I did spend a little time working at the FBI as an IS. I went reservist for a little while, like a year less, and didn't really enjoy it as much as I thought I would. But what happened was my old boss, an older boss who was a cop, called me up one day. He's like, I got this position as a cop position. It's got the potential to get promotion to this, and you could fill it. The billet for it is a cop billet, but I really need you to be an IT guy and help me secure these things because I have no idea what I'm doing. And so I said, okay. So I went back to active duty and did that for a while until I got out.
Okay.
And then when I got out, I was like, what am I going to do? I love being a cop. I never had any ambition to be a cop. That happened. There's a whole story there for another day.
That's a unique transition.
Yeah, it wasn't. It was. Let's just say it wasn't completely my choice. I had screwed the pooch on some career progression things. Had some issues taking tests, to be honest with you. And I was pushed in that direction, to put it nicely, and did not enjoy it really the first year or two. But then I really liked it because every day was a different day. I was helping people. I learned a lot about that world, but also about myself. So it was a really good opportunity for me. And when I got out, I was like, I really like being a cop, but there's no reciprocity in Virginia, as an example. I'd have to basically start over. And I don't feel like starting over making 30, 40,000 a year when I'm making almost six figures, or I had the potential to make six figures at that point, and get shot at, have to put on a bulletproof vest and get shot at. I have a son. And
seems like that's a downside.
It was one of those things where do I want to do what I really enjoy, but yet put myself at risk and threaten, the security of my family, or just go sit behind a desk and do computer stuff and make a lot of money, a lot more money than being a cop anyway. And it was a balance between the two. And I still kind of wish I was a cop some days, but overall, I'm happy with the direction I went. And so my first job out of the military, I think it was, I only spent about 2 or 3 months. I was like a consultant, but then I became I went work for another company and became an IT manager, director type. And I've been doing the same since. And that was 2014, 2015 timeframe. And I was working for a hospital system, a regional hospital system in Southwest Virginia at the time when I saw the advertisement for the CIO for Department of Elections.
Oh. So it was just a blatant advertisement.
It was I think it was like a Monster or a link.
So you're a rando.
I didn't even look.
You're a random person.
I wasn't even looking that hard. I don't believe. I wasn't really thrilled about that job I was in at the time. Not because the job wasn't good. I just really didn't agree with leadership and their direction. And a lot of my peers felt the same. And it was funny. So when I left, and my boss there, who I was pretty close with, we both left at the same time, essentially for the same reasons. But I ended up applying to, be the CIO at Elect. And I was IT director, and I had never been a deputy or associate CIO before. And I thought that I had no chance at it. But when I went through the interview process, had multiple interviews, and ultimately I was selected for the role. And I literally, as a military guy, never really cared too much for politics, it didn't intrigue me. So I didn't really know a lot about it. I knew technology, but I didn't know the business of elections, if you will, at the time. It's a completely different world. Having done a lot of things, whether it's working at Best Buy, doing computer stuff, or working at Stafford County government, doing computer stuff, or my various military roles. And then even when I got out, I worked for multiple private sector organizations with different missions or different business types, if you will. I never, ever experienced anything like the elections business, to be honest. It was very interesting. When I first came on board, I was pretty surprised at the lack of maturity in the IT space, technology space within elections, but it started to make sense really quick. And to sum that up, there wasn't a lot of drive or need, if you will, to put technology at the forefront of elections 10 years ago. So we had my division in elections back in 2010 had one full-time person and one contractor, from what I was told.
That's what I wanted to ask. You don't mind interjecting real quick? The structure of it. Were you like the first person to have a direct oversight of elections as a sole responsibility? Were you essentially the first CIO, CISO of that?
No.
Or were you backfilling somebody?
No. So it was interesting. We had a long time CIO, a great guy. He ended up taking a role working for a contractor. I think he went to like an SAIC or one of those that was supporting the Virginia Information Technologies Agency, also known as VITA. And he and I worked together numerous times and had great conversations. Really good guy, but he needed to change. He went on, but when he started, he was, I believe, the first CIO. He started in there was a lot of people that got brought in to do different IT related things. And a lot of those were contractors. And there became a need to start flipping those contractors to full timers because they saw a more inherent need to put a focus on technology. But it started as small. Again, 2010, 2 people. I think by the time 2015 came, maybe they had 10 people, 10 full timers, somewhere around that, might have been less. And it was really still small, very small shop. Most of the efforts were focused on software development around the Virginia's voter registration database, which is called Veris. And there was a company that was supporting that for the most part, but the agency apparently, again, this is secondhand information because I wasn't there at the time, it wasn't getting what it needed from this company and decided to bring in more independent contractors and some more full-time staff to manage this platform. And then 2016 happened, and everybody knows what happened in 2016 with the election between former President Donald Trump and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. And then initially the claims, and then follow up with the intelligence that Russia was interfering with our elections, or at least attempting to. And so that really highlighted technology in the election space more than it ever did. So a lot of organizations in different sectors or businesses have had this experience at some point or another, whether it be financial sector, medical things, but all of those had kind of,
there's a trigger point.
They all were a lot more well off in 2015, 2016, and it was the election space time to get with the times, if you will, and really put some emphasis and focus on that, because
spotlight's on you.
There was a tremendous amount of growth that came from what happened in 2016 in the IT space with Virginia. And I'm sure it happened similarly in many states or localities. Every state, elections are a state-run thing. Every state has a different way of doing business. Some really put the emphasis on the localities running elections. In our case, in Virginia, it's a Commonwealth. The localities do have the most control over elections. And my agency, the sole purpose of it was for oversight over making sure that localities not only had what they needed, but that they were following all the laws and applicable regulations that were in Virginia's,
like the Constitution of how that goes, and the code.
Also Code of Virginia. That was the main objective for the Department of Elections. But every locality has a general registrar and usually a deputy registrar, and the buck stops with them more so than not, and we support them. So from a technology perspective, we provide them access to the Virginia voter registration database. We had a central database that the entire state used, and that database contains all the voter records, the eligibility, all that stuff. And it's a massive product. It's very complex. I can tell you somewhat overly complex, not just from a developer perspective, but from an end user perspective. It wasn't necessarily the easiest thing to use. It didn't have all the greatest features. And I think that they're addressing that. Post my departure earlier this year, there was a active RFP in progress to replace Verus. And I'm not sure, obviously, where that stands today, but the idea was to replace it with a more modern and more scalable product that will serve Virginia for a long time to come. And but the idea was that, okay, so we got this voter registration database that every locality, all 133 localities in Virginia use. How is that system maintained? How is it enhanced? And how is it protected? Became a big focus after 2016. When my predecessor left, the one I was mentioning that went and worked for a contract company, they did bring in somebody for a temporary period of time. And I'm not 100% sure of the story there, but it didn't last. I don't know if it was temporary on purpose or if it was just a situation where that individual wasn't a good fit, but they brought me on. And when they brought me on, I was taken aback by the level of maturity that the organization was at within the IT space. And I was warned. My boss, the commissioner, had warned me about this throughout my hiring process, but I didn't really understand how the maturity was lacking, how bad it really was. And there was a lot of reasons for that, funding being one of those, and just having a big picture oversight. I came from two previous roles where I was in a hospital system and then a truly private sector organization. And those two organizations helped give me a really good insight about the way things should be. And so when I got to the Department of Elections, I immediately, within my first week, I was like, wow, I've got a lot of work ahead of me. And I hit the ground running. I did hit the ground running.
Were you talking about kind of oversight and making sure the localities could run the elections? Were you responsible for not just the database, but like the voting machines and things of that nature as well?
Yeah, so we had a few divisions within the Department of Elections. I was just one of the divisions, the IT division, but we had our election services division, and they helped make elections happen. We had policy folks within that space as well. We had a communications division. We had training folks to help train registrars and things like that. We had an actual business part that also controlled the business aspects. So there was multiple divisions that all had different things. The IT division's primary focus was providing these products and services, just like any organization, IT organization is providing. We had customers. Let me back up. First, we had our biggest system was the central voter registration data, but we also had a campaign finance system. It is required by law that the political candidates and such have to be very transparent about where the money's coming from for their campaigns and things like that, even just down to putting signs in front yard if you don't have certain things on it, who the paid sponsor was, or who endorsed or who's endorsing this, those rules about that. But the campaign finance system was used for anybody who had any campaign that had to file where the money was coming from and where it was going, essentially. And that was my second largest system. We also have our website, our citizen portal website, which you or me as residents of Virginia could go in and register to vote, request an absentee ballot, since we do that now. I think different things like that, change of address type of stuff, make sure that we're still registered properly, all those things. So that's our citizen portal. So those are our three major products. Obviously, one of them was completely public facing. The campaign finance one was for the campaigns themselves. And then the central voter registration database is meant for the Department of Election staff, but also all of the registrars and their staff. And so we had a lot of different users accessing a lot of different systems. We had internal stuff too. Under my purview, I implemented the Atlassian suite of products, if you're familiar, as an example, Jira, Confluence. I was really focused on bringing knowledge management and collaborative project management approaches, using those systems to back it through. When I got there, as an example, Agile was talked about, but it really wasn't. And so I really had a strong push to get my division, because it was primarily, our focus was software development. We needed to be doing software development. The rest of the world was doing it, which is mostly Agile, some form of Agile, right? Scaled or whatever. So we started moving towards that, and having systems like Jira and Confluence were really important to make that happen. And we replaced a few of our other things. Like, we had different ticketing systems for software development, and we had a different ticketing system for just like normal help desk requests. And I'm like, why are we using all these different systems and paying for licenses? Let's unify it to something that actually talks to itself.
Living up to the government trend of inefficiency is the key.
Yeah, and that was really a huge focus, because I've spent the majority of my life in public sector, whether it been the military, working at the FBI, Stafford County.
Right.
The majority of my life has been public sector, and I've seen this all too often, these inefficiencies and, in a lot of ways, wasteful spending. And really wanted to, that's always in the back of my mind. Whatever decision I was making about how we were going to move forward, I always thought about the taxpayers first. And many of my staff or former staff would say the same. They would tell you, yeah, Dan was always like, taxpayer this, taxpayer that. And it was true, because I'm a taxpayer in Virginia. This is my money going to this stuff. So I want us to do this. I want us to be efficient. I don't want a million products all over the place. It also makes it harder to,
I was going to say, your job's easier when you start consolidating your tool suite into a handful of things versus 9,000.
Exactly. Unified experience helps reduce administrative overhead, is what I always said. And so those were some things, just small things that I tackled, especially early on. It took a long time to make some of those things happen, but that's the government way sometimes. So anyway, yeah, that was a major focus, to bring external best practices to the organization as well, to reduce inefficiencies and to reduce administrative overhead. And again, that was like really important as a CIO. But then there's a lot of other things going on too. And one of the reasons my former boss brought me on is because of my vast cybersecurity background. We had one information security analyst.
Wow.
When I began. And that individual did not have all of what they needed to have to be successful, to be honest, in the role. And it was very hard. But you asked about like voting systems, and I kind of went off the rails a little bit there, trying to talk about the organizational structure and how who our customers were. We had our public, we had our internal to the department customers, and then we had all the registrars and then any of the campaigns. One of the we had different areas. So we had these platforms or general IT systems, but then we also did have to support the certification process of all the voting technology. And that was one of the strangest things to me, because I'm coming in, I don't know anything of these scanners, these electronic devices used to check voters in at polling locations. I had no idea. And there's multiple vendors out there that are approved in the state, and they're all a little bit different. But what I did find out is that our certification process was very new and in its infancy when I first got there. We were revamping it at the time. It started before I got there, the revamping of that. And it really we created a certification process that helped match the Election Assistance Commission at the federal level and exceed their standards that they recommend for states to follow. And it's now being fully implemented. And there's a lot of focus on security, even down to wiping thumb drives that are put in these computers. They have so many like different audit trail type of things associated with how you transfer data is very spelled out. So that way there's no nefarious activity. And then once it's done and over with, or whether you're done using the device or it's brand new, it's got to follow like DoD wipe standards, 7-pass wipes and things like that. Those were never really spelled out before, but they are now. And a lot of work went into that. And I cannot take much of the credit there, because when this was all happening, I was dealing with a lot of other things that I'll get into here in a minute. But one of my counterparts who left the agency before I did, he spent a lot of time working with different vendors, different localities, and other experts, and to come up with this, to make it a really solid plan. So bottom line is that if any vendor wants to sell election equipment, such as scanners or ballot scanners or whatever, they have to go through a rigorous process. It's got to be approved all the way up to the State Board of Elections, which is the oversight for the Department of Elections. It was, when I was first started, a 3-member board. Now it is a 5-member board as of, I think, over July 1st, I think it became a 5-member board, and they filled those slots. That board has to approve any changes that are not like super minor, like typo type changes. They have to approve any change as recommended by the security team that I did eventually stand up, and myself and the commissioner. Once all the internal approvals occurred, then it would go to the state board, and we would have to present it to them in public session, and they would have to say yay or nay to it. And then once that occurred, then that vendor could then sell whatever product it was to the localities. So that was a big deal standing it up, but a lot of other states were pretty impressed with it, and even maybe starting their own certification process to match ours. I know that a lot of states like to look at us. We looked at other states too. Colorado is a really good, they set a really good standard when it comes to elections, and are a lot like us. So I had conversed with my CIO equivalent in Colorado quite often.
I was going to ask if you interacted with a lot of your other counterparts in the other states to kind of information share. Here's what we see works. Here's what we don't see works. I know that, like you said, each state has their own set of rules and the kind of things, the way to execute, but there's still best practices within security. And there's also things like if somebody is becoming a test bed of bad things, it's like, hey guys, just be aware we're experiencing this, be on the lookout type of stuff.
Absolutely. And we definitely got a lot better over the 3 years that I spent there, almost 3 years that I spent in the department. There was a lot of collaboration between our different states, our federal partners, and even local partners, and then some even partners that are private sector. CIS, they have the ISACs, the Information Sharing and Analysis Centers. and they have them for financial. Well, there's a MS, multi-state ISAC, and under the MS ISAC, they stood up an elections infrastructure ISAC, which I also sat on their executive committee for a period of time while at elections. And that brought a lot of us together, talking about different things and how we can make things better, but also offering intelligence to the best of the ability without getting too crazy in the classified realm from
Sure.
national security aspect. But there was intelligence sharing about threats. We've had different, like different big ransomwares that come out, right? They would send out messages. Here's what you're looking for. Here's where you can report issues. Here's where you can get help if you are attacked or whatever. Like, they were really good. Everybody bonded really well, in my opinion, as time went on from when I first started elect. And it was really, actually felt very good. It felt people really care about our democracy and want to collaborate and want to share and want to be better, because the building blocks of this country are at risk, essentially, post 2016. And coming together was really good. Technology being as immature in the election space was really important to recognize that and to put a lot of effort and energy into that. And I think that we are in a lot better place. I hear a lot on the news about this, that, other thing, Georgia this, Arizona that, following the last presidential election. And I can't speak to any other state, but I can say that, holy cow, we were night and day from when I first started to when we had the last few elections we've had, major elections, with our ability to protect ourselves, to share intelligence, to recover if there is an issue, to get the right people. I had FBI, CISO / DHS on speed dial. I can call them anytime and say, hey, this is an issue. I need help here, whatever. And they were there without a problem. And honestly, I didn't never need help with my area. Thank God, my department, but I did support a lot of localities who really, some of them struggled.
Yeah, call this the salacious part of the conversation, at least a little bit, if you experienced it. I remember you making a comment, I think we talked at some point last year, where you were talking about the national exposure that Virginia had in this last election, because it was only one of two governor's races in the whole country. So when something like that happens and you've got that spotlight on you, are you getting, do you feel the pressure, but two, are you getting a lot more outreach from those other places because the national focus is very limited? So yes. Are you getting proactive phone calls from CISA and FBI and all
absolutely
that kind of stuff?
Absolutely. And it wasn't just this election, to be honest with you. There was a lot of proactivity throughout the last 2 years. I'll put it that way. My last 2 years there, even if it was smaller elections that weren't even they were always there, and a lot of times proactive. There was a lot of pressure on the agency, on the localities, the registrars. In this last governor's race, it was, in a way, it was worse than the 2020 election for us. No, not in a way. It was, and we knew going into that there was, not many elections. It was an elections off year for most people, but in Virginia, and my former boss used to say all the time, like, we're always having elections. People ask.
It's very annoying. I live in Stafford, where it's super, super annoying. Sorry, I had to interject.
Of course, yeah. It's like all the time. There's like an election. I think, like, on average, we're having 6 elections a year. The last, pretty much every year I worked there, it felt like it was like 6. It could be something small, like a special election, or it could be a little larger state level election, or it could be a national election. There was always elections going on. And for me and my team, whether it was a big presidential, or it was a Virginia governor's race, or it was a special election, honestly, there's more attention with the bigger races, but the amount of work we had to do on our end was the same. Getting the systems ready and all that. Our election services division, as well as my division, had to put about as much effort in for every single election, no matter what the size was. Obviously, there's a little bit more to it with the bigger ones, but it felt the same, and it was constant. There was always an election. There was always the same concerns, and that made some of my change. Most people in the previous role and other previous roles will say, I'm a change agent, right? Like, I go in and I'm looking for problems and I'm looking how to solve the problems. And that's one of my one of my key contributions in the workplace overall. It was really hard to push forward change the way I wanted to, not just because I'm in a government entity. Public sector is not always easy, and it's really slow, and it gets bureaucratic at times. But when there's always an election going on, you can't be making changes to systems. We would go and change
I was going to ask that.
all this other stuff, and it really made it difficult to push the ball forward sometimes. So we really tried to like cram things in. Last year was a great example. The Virginia Information Technologies Agency had to move the data center, their on-prem data center, to a new place. And we knew about that for a while. Unfortunately, some of their requirements and rules would not let us move some of our physical servers the way we did to their new data center, because they were virtualizing everything to meet the governor's executive order from a few years ago, which required all agencies to get to the cloud by XYZ.
Sure.
And I spoke about Verus, the central voter registration database. It was a beast. And one of our database servers required a lot of memory that they would not be able to get for us in that environment. So we had to quickly pivot on a dime, and I had to make a decision to move not just that platform to the cloud, but decided that if we're going to do one, and the one that we're doing is our biggest, and we have all these integrations with the other parts of it, we might as well do it all. And so we were also supposed to be doing redistricting based off of the 2020, was it 2020 census? Was it 2020?
I believe so. I know some of that stuff is going on now, or it's just got wrapped up. So yeah.
It's now going on right now, but we were supposed to start it last year on this time, and it was like, how are we going to do all this? And thank God for, at the time, that the census and the state they were not ready to do it in the late winter, spring of last year. And so last year we migrated every application and everything to the cloud, to Azure. And that was a big win, but it was a nightmare. And we were trying to do it in between special elections, and we had the potential for having to start this redistricting, and we didn't know when that was coming. So there was a lot, and it took us till, I think the majority of it got done by June, that migration. And I think we were the first agency, at least executive branch agency in Virginia, to migrate all of its applications to the cloud. Meanwhile, while dealing with elections and whatnot, and getting ready for this big gubernatorial one that we just went through in November, like there was so much going on. I thought 2020 was bad. 2021, honestly, put 2020 to shame. And in retrospect, I cannot tell you how last year was a lot. There was a lot going on between the cloud migration and these elections and
projects that we're trying to keep in the moving forward.
There was a lot. And so that was long-winded, but it was definitely a rough experience.
How much, and I don't know if you experienced this at your time that is there, if it did some of the elected officials, if there was changeover, I'll say either from one party or ideology or priority, even if it would play into either your decision making or something that you had active going on. You mentioned the executive order, but I would imagine that, let's say there was a switch over at a board of supervisors in a county, or the state legislature swaps houses or something like that reshuffles things around. Did you experience any of that in your time?
Other than having to do special elections as a result, like if one person leaves and then they have
to... But no policies or no internal priority changes within the elections department.
Not really.
You experienced.
I'm sure it's probably different today as we have a new governor. I left right at the beginning of January before the change of power, and never really saw much policy change in that regard, because the entire time I was there, Governor Northam was a governor, and even though seats were changing, the one thing that did occur, but I would not have, it seemed normal for me, because at the time, I think both chambers went blue.
Mm-hmm.
When it was like the first year.
That was like the first year in a long time that's happened.
Yeah.
The first time in 60 years or something crazy or ever.
That happened right when I got there or shortly thereafter. And the amount of laws, election laws, I think we had 57 or 58 legislative changes ahead of 2020 that needed to be implemented. And a lot of those were required IT changes. And it really crushed my development team and the QA folks and our infrastructure folks who were doing these deployments, or DevOps folks. It was like there was change after change. And I remember a good example of our immaturity, we didn't have change control. When I got there, there was people doing deployments without me even knowing about it as a CIO, and then come in the next morning and Verus is down. And it's what happened. I called my director of this area, software development, and he didn't know exactly what was going on. And then I called this other guy and he said, "Oh yeah, we did that last night." And I'm like, "Okay, nobody told me about that. And now the system's down. We broke something. There's no record." It was that type of crazy when I first got there. It didn't stay that way for very long. I think within 3 months I had change control. We were having weekly meetings, and we made it. All the directors basically were voting members on the change advisory board, and I would be the either overrule or a tiebreaker person. And IT governance 101. But the whole point of saying that was that because there were so many changes happening as a result of the legislative changes, some of these bills they tried to get through for years. And I guess in the case of the majority of the legislative branch being blue now, that there was a lot of people on the Republican side that were blocking those bills. So as soon as they had majority, all these things started flowing like a faucet. And it was wild how many things that were coming through at any given point in time with that, because there was a system change here. Early voting was one of them. Early voting, which we do, and early/absentee voting.
That's how I do early voting personally.
And it's really awesome to have that ability. But the amount of changes.
I thought about you last year.
Yeah, thanks. My life is way easier now. But my team really, they worked countless hours to implement these because it's not just that these laws get passed, they also have implementation deadlines. July 1st is when most laws go into effect in Virginia, but most of these changes had to go in by July 1st of every year, every time they would do this. Some of them could be staggered because it would be like the next presidential election or whatever, or the next federal election, I should say. And so that some of those gave us some leeway, but for the most part, they had to be implemented right away. And when it's hard for a legislator to know the implications of all these changes coming through all at once, and how fragile our systems are sometimes. Specifically, I spoke about Verus and how these changes were A, hard to make, B, we don't want to have them making multiple changes at the same time break something completely anomalous and having.
I have those conversations.
To chart it out it was crazy. And then the deadline doesn't make it easy either, because now you're rushing things. And because we were also immature in certain areas, I think I had 2 QA people for having to QA all 3 major systems, 3 major platforms, any changes that happen to 2 people that can QA it. And I'm pulling other people in, some of our BAs and whatnot, to help in that. Mm-hmm. And that's hurting them too. But I wish at points in time, that the legislators knew the consequences of what they were doing to us, and how it was very hard, because we're still a small team. I think at the end, between contractors and employees, I might have been 40 plus, just a little over 40 people at the max. And with all the customers, internal, external, and then in the field with all the systems that we had, it was a lot. It was quite a bit. I know that they're in a better place now. Whether we're talking about public sector, private sector, whenever there's requirements are downward driven, I believe that it's very important for those folks making those decisions to really, truly understand the ramifications of what they're asking or directing. And it would have been, although we were very successful in making all the changes that we were required to make, obviously, because we don't want to be in violation of the law and get sued. The fact of the matter is that it takes a toll on people. People have to do the work. And if the budget doesn't allow me to hire more people and train them up, that's going to make it even more difficult. I am very grateful for my team to this day and all the work that they did to make all these things happen. I can say without a doubt that Virginia did a great job in all the elections since I was there, making them accessible to everyone and free and fair and secure.
No, that's awesome, and I think I want to echo that sentiment because I've actually had this conversation recently. That it seems like some of those Fortune 100, 500 companies take that same approach. And as someone that's driven lots of projects, you got to have all the stakeholders at the table. It's
Right.
not that you're against the changes that are coming, but don't make an arbitrary decision without understanding exactly the kind of the scope and level of effort that goes into that. And
Absolutely.
matter of fact, you'll be a champion of that instead of having arbitrary timeframes, which is, for better or worse, in your case, probably what happens when you an elected official with no experience in this and making promises that they don't exactly understand in some cases.
And I think it's important for us, like people like me and my peers and my leader. I think it's also important that we try to educate them. And if I talk to you about localities, and I don't know how much time we have, but if I talked about localities and get more on the security topic, one of the things that I would do I assisted in multiple cyber attacks at localities across Virginia.
Dive into that for a minute. Oh, without you.
So, at one point there was a rural locality who did not really have any more than a guy that showed up once a week for a few hours to hook up printers and whatnot. This locality got completely taken down by a ransomware attack and was out of commission for a month and a half. Basic services like life safety type things like 911 and things were back up pretty quick, or either were up pretty quick or were not affected in the same way. So the concern there wasn't bad, but that's still a huge concern, and validating that they're okay was really important. But when all of your constituent services, whether it's getting a building permit, election,
Right.
whatever,
Pay water, pay the water
bill, like personal property taxes, things like that. When you can't do those things, that puts you in a grinding halt. And it's not just about the locality collecting revenue, but if I'm building a house or want to put stairs off my deck and I need a building permit and I can't do it because your phones are down, can't get in touch with you. I walk in, the computers are down, can't do nothing for you. That's pretty bad. And that happened numerous times in my tenure. And because there was a law that was passed back in, I think, the 2019 General Assembly session that basically gave the Department of Elections the authority to ensure that locality security met a specific set of standards that eventually myself and a work group created, and then the state board promulgated out to all localities. So,
like when you say security, not just election security, but you're talking about whole infrastructure, whole everything security.
So here was the thought process here, and I'm gonna bounce around a little bit. So a few years ago, there was a locality out there, and I said this in some public speeches that I made.
You can probably Google it pretty easily too.
No, this won't be public, but bottom line, they bought was it Kaspersky? Yeah, I think they bought.
Oh yeah, yep.
And you might have heard this story off. We talked about this maybe off on side or something one time. They got Kaspersky, that individual that was the sole information security officer or analyst when I got to the agency, had said, can't use that. It's like Russian. It's a Russian product.
That was a big time news thing.
And it's on the DHS do not use list, basically. She told whoever that was running IT in this locality, they said, don't care, money's spent, we're keeping it. My boss ended up calling, I think it was my boss that ended up calling the locality county administrator or city manager type, and they sided with the IT thing. Eventually, it caused a lot of waves. Eventually, we negotiated for them to remove it from the election computers, but this got brought up. And so the law basically says that because the registrars in each locality are supported by the locality, their paychecks come from the locality, but some of that money comes from the state. There's some reimbursement for the registrar, but they're not really full state employees. I think they're considered constitutional officers. So they are in a way independent. They don't report up through the county administrator, city manager. But
I want to say I want to say something only because you triggered a thought, and I
Mhm.
want to tell you a story after you get done.
Okay.
I was told board of supervisors were constitutional authorities, and they didn't have to abide by any of the IT regulations of anybody anywhere.
Yeah,
And I looked in the face and I said, "You, one, I don't believe you, but two, anyway." I digress.
I don't know. I don't know about that one. The board of supervisor, they're supposed to follow the same rules that are driven by the policies and procedures from the IT department, if there is an IT department. But that's all different.
We'll talk about that. Yeah. Anyway.
That's interesting. That's interesting. So these folks are getting, the registrars are getting their computers from the locality. And if we use the locality, I was just starting to talk about the ransomware attack. They got one IT contractor that shows up once a week.
Sure.
And for a few hours, and might just be a computer savvy person, but may not even have an A+ certification, let alone something more. You can imagine that there's no group policies. You'd be lucky if there's decent endpoint protection.
There's no access control. There's no nothing.
Yeah. So these computers, though, are connecting back to our central voter registration database. And that was the linchpin. If you are connecting to our system with your systems, they have to meet this requirement. And so the scope of it is just elections, computers. But hey, you still need to have a firewall. And if those election computer systems are on a domain, that domain controller now becomes part of that the scope.
Are you in the same network? Are you on the same subnet?
Even if you VLAN it doesn't matter. You got to think about everything that touches where something can happen. So this caused a lot of issues, and it still is causing issues, this law. But it's the first time that a law basically put any sort of cybersecurity requirements over localities in any way, shape, or form. Now, the scope was, again, just elections activities connecting back.
Okay.
But that scope can be expanded. Some localities.
It's very easy to do that. I made the comment, I said, I can take a cybersecurity hole. How far deep do you want to go?
Right. The problem was some of this stuff costs a lot of money. And if you have a rural locality that doesn't have the revenue, if you will, to hire IT folks or the right IT folks or the right products, then you're kind of between a rock and a hard place. I think that some localities chose to create completely independent networks and computer systems because they said it was too much work, too much effort to do it across their whole enterprise. And I begged and pleaded on the side, saying, this is not the right move. This is the opportunity that you guys should be taking to do X, Y, Z across your entire platform as much as possible. Because if you just say you're prone to, so you're okay, elections activity in the locality might be okay, but what about your 911 dispatch? That's a life safety thing. If they're on the same network, wouldn't you want to just kill two birds with one stone if you could? And some people chose different. And it was not my place as the POC or head of that whole program and instituting this on behalf of the state board. It wasn't my place to tell them how to do it. I just said, here's the requirements. Here's what you got to do to meet them. You choose whatever way you want to meet them. My main concern is the protection of the voter registration database and safe and secure elections in Virginia. But if I take my CIO hat off and put my Dan Persico hat on, just me, I don't do that to yourself. And here's why. The ransomware attack that we had that I was starting to talk about, a month and a half of, I would say 2 weeks of completely nothing. After about 2 weeks, some main things started coming back. We were able to recover some main things. And then after a month, they started getting more of the outliers back online. But it was for 2 to 3 weeks, almost completely crippled. You know what I'm saying? And a locality can't do what it's meant to do because it didn't take the proactive steps. So one of the things that I did through this process and through some others is I met with I met with the board of supervisors. In some cases, I met with the electoral board at the localities who oversee the registrar and hire the registrar. I met with these folks and I said, you got to invest in this because this is what happens when you don't. And you don't want this to happen again. We're having emergency meetings until midnight and blah, blah, blah. Everyone is freaking out right now. This could have been prevented if there was more proactivity. And you can't always protect against all threats. But one thing that they really screwed the pooch on in this one case, they didn't have offsite backups. They had an attached NAS storage on a server that had a password that was basically password. That's the security we're talking about, and the lack of contingency planning or incident response. There's not
Sure.
like nobody knew what to do when this happened either. It took a week just to get everybody involved. And when it got to me, I'm the one that started making the phone calls. I had, within about 12 hours of finding out, I had everyone on the phone, from FBI, CISA, state police, National Guard, and everyone showed up, and everyone came together and did the right thing. But boy, oh boy, it was a mess. And here's the other thing. In that case, the county administrator did not want to hear advice from all these people, including me. Shut me out, shut me down. She was worried about her reputation more than recovering. And so, word to all leaders out there: put your own emotions and your job security aside, your job security minded self aside for a second, and do the right thing, because that individual made a lot of missteps. And
I want to ask it. I'm going to ask a short question, and then I want to tell you experience I had and see if this is what you in the localities. You talked about getting cyber standards, and there was a law there. Were you using like a NIST standard, or did you make up your own set of rules?
We actually did start from the NIST, but we knew that there was no way that all the localities, all 133 localities, were ever going to meet all.
Which special publication were you trying to align to?
CSF, the cybersecurity framework.
Just a CSF one. Okay. So, yeah, because
we started from there, and we did do top 20, top 8. We combined the two of those, and so the work group, there was a work group that was formed, and the work group was led by me. I was the chairman for it, but I had locality IT directors, CIOs / CISOs / you name it. As part of, I also had JLARC, the legislative audit. I forget what the acronym stands for, from the state, that were there. I had representatives from the VML and VACO, the Virginia Municipality League, and the Virginia Association of Counties. We had a huge work group. We met every 3 weeks from like May of 2019 through October. Every 3 weeks we met in person, and for 4 hours, we had 4-hour sessions in the Richmond area, and it started off bad. I make the joke, like, people were throwing chairs at each other, but people were raising their voices. It was not, because we had everything from, who are you, big state, to tell us what to do? And we had people like, that's just bullshit. We shouldn't have to do that. And it was, you name it. It was a lot of infighting, but eventually, I'd say within the first month or two of doing this, like, people got on track and started to see the light in what we're trying to do here. And it became it ended up being, the standards ended up being a reasonable set of expectations that we can push on localities. And the idea was to now, as of my last meeting with the group, because we have an advisory group now that is all the time, that meets to decide if the standards need to be adjusted. So the idea is that the standards will be adjusted based off of the threat landscape. But we started small and then figure out where we're at. There's a lot of folks that are still struggling there, and we are doing different things. We got through UVA and a consortium with a bunch of colleges, including Virginia Tech, UVA, Norfolk State, George Mason. I'm trying to think. VCU is a big one. We're creating a cyber navigator program to have students come and help localities, so they learn, and then the localities can get some help. So that program is taking off. We did a pilot with a locality in Southwest Virginia that I led last summer in the fall, and it did produce some good outcomes there. But there's a lot of different things in the works there to try to increase the overall cybersecurity posture of the Commonwealth, because localities are a part of that.
It's funny you mentioned the universities, because in the latest study that came out of the biggest industries that are hit, universities and research institutions are number one, and it's not even close if you go look at the chart. Yep. So I'll tell you experience that I had a few years ago with another county. As far as I wasn't looking for anything, I was doing some volunteer work for the local chamber of commerce, and I came across something that just wasn't right.
Uh-huh.
And so I knew everybody in play except for the local IT staff, and ended up setting up a meeting. And I said, because I wasn't necessarily getting responses, and then, well, I knew the county administrator, so I knew how to make it happen. So I reached out and had the meeting to understand the lack of budget, the lack of resources, and no kidding, almost proud and bragging about the ability to do things that are horrible as far as taking equipment past end of life. And I'm not talking obviously election equipment, but I know these guys had purview over essentially everything, sheriff, first responders, all of that type of stuff, and a very minuscule staff for even just the amount of people to support, much less who knows what systems and stuff are in play. Is that, do you see with now all of the exposure in the local government, you use elections obviously as being a news dominating piece of technology for state governments, that there's going to be a ramp up in funding to better implement technology across the board and cybersecurity standards?
I certainly hope so. I know that there was a lot of talk about this infrastructure bill at the national level and what that would be used for. I know that CISA is up in their game with hiring a lot more people, making the pay.
But you still got to have the boots on the ground in the localities to execute day to day.
That's all true, but it starts at the top. And, you know, again, technology is not cheap. Paying good technologists is also not cheap. If you want somebody good, not somebody that can just connect the printer or reboot a computer for you, these people either go to school for it or they spend a lot of money getting certified and et cetera, et cetera. You can't expect a locality that's got a very small population to generate the amount of revenue themselves to pay somebody $150,000 a year to run their IT and security stuff. That's just not going to happen. So without grants or some external funding, you're going to continue to see that being a problem. Now, there are ways around it, and you could do different things with contractors and whatnot. So you're not paying maybe for somebody on full time, but a lot of the time it's just, there's the other component here that I've noticed is that you have leaders in roles like boards of supervisors, county administrators, and things like that. And not to be disrespectful to any of them, but a lot of those folks are not.
I know where you're going because I've probably had said the same
discriminatory. But if you have somebody who's 80 years old, who's retired and got appointed to this position or got elected to this position, they know what their advisors tell them, and who knows what kind of their knowledge background is and what they see threats to be and where they want to approve budgets for that money to go here, there, anywhere. That is a huge problem, more so in rural localities than not, that I see. I think I mentioned earlier, educating leaders is a huge component to a successful cybersecurity program or operation. And I will say I am very thankful. I wasn't keen about the 57 legislative changes or 58 legislative changes.
Probably not all.
But I am very thankful to them because they gave me 3 bodies, 3 brand new full-time positions just to stand up. I stood up a cybersecurity team in elections back in 2020, and the team is going strong now. I heard they just hired a CISO, and I'm really happy about that. I was able to get that, but I think if I was one of those members of the General Assembly, when I see this bill for cybersecurity around elections, I could not vote for it. That would just really be bad, look bad. But and I'm thankful that we got those spots. But what happens at these localities or other states or other even nonprofits and private sector? Like if the leaders don't understand the risk of not doing something because nobody's advised them, or if they've been advised and they're just like, I got to do this. A friend of mine who represented localities in Virginia through one of the lobbying groups, when I was having a conversation with them about this kind of situation. And they said, well, Dan, if it's between another deputy on the street or a fire truck or your security requirements for computers, what do you think is more important? What do you think that the board of supervisors or whoever is going to think is more important? And I said, I know I know your answer to that, but that is not my answer. It depends on what's going on. As a cop, former cop, who had to pull extra shifts at times and do extra things because our manning was low, or our cars were broke because we used our cop cars into the ground, and I'd work an entire shift without heat in the middle of winter in a vehicle because they couldn't afford to fix it. Having been there, I get it. I get some of the sentiment that individuals tell me, but I'm like, okay, so it's great if you have more deputies and more fire trucks, but what happens when you can't dispatch them because the entire 911 dispatch system is down, your radios are down, your phones are down, because you didn't think about the technology implication of this? Or even worse, think about it this way. As a cop, if I pull somebody over and I run an NCIC check on the license plate or the driver's license and the person has an active warrant, armed and dangerous, obviously if I pull somebody over and the vehicle was flagged for having, it's going to tell me right away, and I'm not going to approach that vehicle until I have backup. It becomes a high risk traffic stop at that point. But if I don't know that because the computers are down and I can't get that information, and I walk up to the car, say license registration, here's the reason I pull you over, and the guy just pulls a gun out and shoots me, now you have an officer dead because of a technology issue. People don't realize how technology has truly become the cornerstone of every aspect of our society. And if we're not protecting it, we're not investing in it, and we're not protecting it, these threat actors are gonna always stay, ahead of us, even though we're trying to stay ahead of them. And they will always continue to wreak havoc. For whatever their motives are, they will continue to do that. So it is really important that leaders at all levels, all sectors, realize that organizational risk management needs to account for our technology risk, or digital risk, sensitive data, things like that. I know that one of the things that I did as well at Elect is introduce data privacy. We might have hired a privacy officer and made it part of this cybersecurity thing. I'm going to talk about that next week. And that I was telling you earlier before we went live, I'm speaking at an event next week, a government innovation event, and I'm going to really, talk a lot about how it's important to look at cybersecurity in a more organizational risk management perspective, but also how you can include data privacy. Data privacy got made huge out of GDPR and over in the European Union a few years ago, back in 2016, I think is when it went into effect. California's got some similar rules. We passed a consumer data privacy law in Virginia last year. Those are huge. And cybersecurity, data privacy, and organizational compliance and organizational risk should all be folded into one area, really. And it needs to go to the CEO or the boards that maybe oversee, or their whatever the title is at the top. It needs to get to the top so that people are funding the proper things and really addressing the risk before they become a disaster for the organization. It happens so many times if you read articles. But the other thing I hear all the time, I'm going to shut up after this, it's not going to happen to us until it does.
Absolutely. I know you're not there anymore, and I wanted to ask this as a final question to wrap up. If you, on your way out, could have waved the magic wand in the public sector and in the areas that you were doing to go, you accomplished a lot with the modernization to the cloud and getting some of the cybersecurity principles in place. What is that thing that you felt that was maybe left unfinished, or you would have, if you could snap your fingers, would have been the next thing?
Honestly, I think I set it on the right trajectory. It was more of follow through. There were some bigger issues that I wanted to work on at the state overall and bring other partners in to help fix. I really wanted to unify cybersecurity across the Commonwealth. Efforts to do so already, and some of those I was involved with, but it was really important in my opinion, looking back, and I will say this, even if it probably gets me in trouble if anybody sees this.
This is how I'm going to title the episode now. Here we go.
Yeah, exactly. Cybersecurity, data privacy, those those key areas to combat or mitigate digital risk need to be more unified. In Virginia, you got your three branches. VITA, the Virginia Information Technology Agency, is by law going to take care of security and infrastructure for all executive branch agencies, which is the majority of the state. But then you have outlying independent agencies. You got the legislative branch, who did actually suffer an attack
I remember
a few months ago,
Yep.
A ransomware attack. Yeah. And then you have your judicial branch, and you've got organizations like state police, Virginia's Homeland Security Group, or I forget what department, I forget what their public safety and homeland security for Virginia. And they have some roles and responsibilities over incident management and emergencies, such as a ransomware attack. And then you've got localities, and then you've got these other kind of outliers out there that somehow contribute. There's not a unified front. I was aware that previously, I think, what was the last Republican governor? It was before McAuliffe, right?
Yeah, I'm blanking myself now. Because Virginia does one, for anybody listening, Virginia does one-term governors. They can run again, but they can't be concurrent.
Exactly. But there was the last Republican governor, and I can't remember who it is off the top of my head. I'm blanking. I know it's like the word, or his name is on the tip of my tongue. Under that administration, they had a Secretary of Technology back then that was disbanded, I think, around the time Terry McAuliffe.
No, McAuliffe, I believe, had the last one. Because that was I've actually talked to her, Karen.
Okay, gotcha.
I'm blanking. They rolled
the timeline because I wasn't really. This is before my time.
Yeah,
but they had a second,
and they actually, it was Northam that rolled it up underneath the economic development
Secretary of Administration. Secretary of Administration. It fell under after that. And so that was just like, I think it's really important to have that at the governor's cabinet level, to have somebody represent technology, not just the operational side, but the cybersecurity side, and then other things, principles within there when you talk about organizational risk. And so apologies for not being able to remember, but I just know
it was Karen Jackson.
Yes.
Karen Jackson was the last one, because I remember talking to her, and I don't know what Youngkin, if he's reinstated it or have left the structure the same.
He is not. The structure is currently the same as of right now. And it's funny because the current Secretary of Administration, as I've been told, is a former CIO of the Federal Reserve. I don't know, like a specific location or whatever. So that was cool to hear that, okay, at least they have a technologist in that role. I don't know much about the individual, but I'm happy that that's there, because that is helping put technology. But that still doesn't. That's the executive branch again. We need to think a little bit bigger, and we need to have some form of, whether it's a work group, advisory group, or board or something that brings all of this together and does include localities. Because even though the state can't force localities to do anything, theoretically, I think we all have a common need to stay ahead of this, no matter what part of the Virginia government you are. And we can even include some of the public sector universities, state-run schools. There's a lot of smart people over at Tech that I know. Tech UVA, I deal with some of these computer science folks, some of the research programs and research labs that they have, like, they're bleeding edge. And we can really, honestly, if we unify better, we can really make the Commonwealth of Virginia stronger. And then if we do that, maybe other states will follow suit if they're not, or if there's nobody else out there doing that already, because I'm not familiar with every state and how they structure it. But I will say it's a little disjointed, and that disjointedness is, I always equate this back to the 9/11 Commission report. What happened? What are some of the biggest failures of 9/11? And why it happened? It was a failure to communicate. It was a failure to be unified. And if we can't take lessons of something like that catastrophic and then apply those to any sort of forward risk management principles in cybersecurity or otherwise, right, then we're bound to have problems. And I don't want to see that, not just for myself, but for my family, friends, my child. I want us to be 10 steps ahead of them, bad guys, all the time. That's my goal. And I hope that we can get to that place by changing our mindset, being more proactive, and not saying, "Oh, well, that's never going to happen to us," and making excuses for why we can't fund these things. It's really important.
No, and I'll wrap this up with a saying I always hear from the Marine Corps to rub it in.
Oh boy,
We don't want to show up to a fair fight.
exactly. That's we got to keep the fight unfair. Got to stay ahead.
Yeah, I really appreciate the time.
Yep.
If anybody wants to reach out, connect with you, what's the best place?
They can hit me up on LinkedIn and send me a message on there.
Sounds good. Awesome.
Awesome. Thank you, John. Appreciate it.